Now, it's a policy he claims is top of his agenda, but the Prime Minister appears to be struggling to keep control of his plans to tighten immigration rules. More than 80 Tory MPs voted for a rebel amendment, making it easier to deport foreign criminals, as David Cameron told ministers to abstain in order not to lose face. The rebel measure only fell, in fact, because Labour and Liberal Democrats voted against it, as our political correspondent Michael Crick now reports.
Today's debate was due before Christmas, but postponed when ministers feared a big revolt over keeping controls on Romanians and Bulgarians working here. The backdrop's rather changed since then. Hardly any Romanians or Bulgarians actually turned up. Yet a poll this week suggests voters now think immigration is as big an issue as the economy.
This immigration bill, I believe, is an important bill. It is a bill that has, I think, widespread support outside of this House.
But Tory backbenchers had now found a new tough measure: powers for ministers to deport immigrants who commit serious crimes, an amendment proposed by Dominic Raab. The PM was sympathetic, we were told, but worried it might be illegal. So how would he and his ministers actually vote? On Twitter around noon, journalists suddenly reported ministers would be abstaining on the Raab amendment. But half an hour or so later, one wondered if anybody had told the Home Secretary that yet.
And I wait to see whether my honourable friend is going to move his amendment or not. And then I will make clear to the House what the government's position in relation to this is.
Mr Raab did indeed propose his measure, arguing that hundreds of immigrant criminals were exploiting the right to family life to avoid deportation.
You really do actually have to study the case law of the Immigration Tribunal to appreciate the extent to which these cases warp the moral balance of British justice, endanger the public, and frankly, for many people outside of this place, make human rights dirty words.
But as ministers put forward a last-minute alternative instead to strip immigrant terror suspects of citizenship, opposition MPs sensed panic.
This is a rotten bill, made all the more rottener because of some of these appalling amendments that we are discussing this afternoon. We're in this business today because this government is in an appalling race to the bottom with the United Kingdom Independence Party.
Order! 85 Tories backed Raab, but were thwarted by the Lib Dems and Labour, leaving Theresa May to face their jeers.
We know she opposed the amendment because if she'd supported it, she could have voted for it and it would have gone through. But she didn't. She sat on her hands because she was scared.
So tonight, David Cameron and his party are looking both divided and weak. Ministers were told to abstain to save face, but at the humiliating price of needing Labour votes to quash a measure that the government thought was illegal. And today's shambles has overshadowed a chance for ministers to show that they're really being tough on immigration and facing up to the electoral challenge from UKIP. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
So earlier I spoke to Dominic Raab, the backbench Tory MP who tabled the key amendment. I started by asking him if the Lib Dems voted as they wanted to against him, hadn't the Conservatives also voted as one body in support of his amendment?
Well, look, I think it's a shame that we didn't get the government rowing behind us. But you know, all I can tell you is what I know and what I understand, and that's that there was not cross-party coalition support for this. And whilst all, mostly all, but not every Conservative MP on the backbenches wanted to see this go through, we couldn't persuade our Liberal Democrat colleagues, and they voted against it. But we couldn't, as a result of that, get the government as a whole to back it.
But what, of course, the picture you've left with the average voter is one of a complete shambles. And immigration is, after all, one of the things which is apparently one of the most fiercest contested issues in the country. And what have the people seen today? A complete shambles in Parliament, and you're the agent of it.
Well, if we all act like clones, you criticise us for not standing up for what we believe. And I'm no serial rebel, check my record, if we actually bring forward a modest, practical, substantive amendment to a piece of legislation, which is, after all, is the job that we're elected to do, you call us agents of shambles and chaos.
Well, forgive me, what does it look like if your own leadership is against you?
Well, it abstained because we're in coalition. So what the message, I think, very clearly is what a Conservative majority government could achieve if we didn't have that constraint is stronger border controls, and the strategic decision taken by Labour was to stand up for the rights of criminals.
I'm sorry, but you're living in a crowd cuckoo land if you think that that's the case. Well, now, you say that the Prime Minister talked to you this afternoon about this issue. I mean, what are relations like? There are lots of complaints around that he doesn't come into the tea room, that he doesn't mess with the MPs very much. Isn't this perhaps an illustration of the gulf between you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, I'm not one of those MPs that needs positive strokes left, right and centre. I have to say I found it very useful and very constructive having this conversation. I was glad that the government at least abstained to allow us to get the chance to have the debate and have the vote. And what you had, rather than blue on blue, I know the way you're trying to depict it, and typical way I would expect you to, but rather than blue on blue, what the fight was blue versus red and yellow, and the Conservatives standing up for stronger deportation controls, and the Labour Party taking a strategic decision
Dominic
to back
Raab,
the rights of criminals.
The average voter may get a bit lost in this colourful language.
Who makes you the arbiter of what the average voter thinks?
Well, I'm just suggesting that you've given a pretty complicated, colour-coded description there. Let me just ask you finally then, I mean, if you've been able to do this, there are going to be other MPs, particularly in the Conservative Party, who are going to want to get their own issues out into the bloc, and you'll have a real shambles in government.
I've only ever introduced 2 sets of amendments. I voted for this bill at third reading. I wasn't trying to bring down the bill, but I was trying to say, look, we need stronger border controls and less rights for criminals. And actually, I'm not going to apologise to you for that, because I think most of your viewers, whatever their political affiliation, would agree with it.
Dominic Raab, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Well, Michael Crick joins us now from Westminster. Well, Michael, Dominic Raab didn't want to talk about what he called blue-on-blue wrangling, but I mean, just over a year away from a general election, that is quite an issue for David Cameron, isn't it?
Indeed, and it looked last night as if actually today's revolt might not be that substantial. There have been a number of voices in the party over the last few days calling for unity. You had the Spectator editorial today, Michael Howard this morning saying don't rock the vote with an election in the offing, and even a serial rebel, Douglas Carswell, saying that he regrets some of his recent rebellions and he's not going to rebel anymore. And yet 86 Conservative MPs voted for this amendment, along with 10 Labour people, it should be said, by the way. So that shows there is still a substantial body of Conservative MPs, almost 100, who've been rebelling at regular intervals in this Parliament on a scale that we've never seen before in modern politics, although Dominic Raab, as he himself says, is not a serial rebel. And that is really worrying for the government at a time when they thought they'd be able to create a bit more unity. There's election, prospects of a European election, general election, polls narrowing, the economy doing better. And Dominic Raab says this shows what we might do if we had a majority Conservative government. I think it also shows what kind of problems David Cameron might have with his right wing if he was a majority Conservative Prime Minister.
Quite something, though, when Douglas Carswell says he's not going to rebel anymore. Michael, thank you very much. John.